Whew, good morning. Well, I just listened to parts of the episode that you're going to get to listen to today, and I am so excited to share this with you. I am excited to share and celebrate the stories of other courageous people who suffered greatly and at some point entered their own suffering, that they might heal themselves and also be a healing agent for others to create the kind of world that I want to live in. And I need your help. If you are enjoying Grief Heals, if it is benefiting you in any kind of way, opening your vision to how it is that grief heals, how we all need, desire, long for love, that we were designed for love, made by love, for love, and that grief is the invitation and indeed the way, right? It shows the direction to all the places, all the crevices that love is needed, not only in our lives, but in the lives of others, in our communities, the way that love sews us back together. It literally remembers us, right? And grief provides the way for us to be witnessed and remembered. So please like, review, and share this podcast. I'm just going to say it right now. I think we've got one review. And so many of you have reached out to me. So I am asking you who have been loving this podcast, who have benefited, please. I know you're investing your energy every time you listen, and I am so grateful. And I am asking that you please also invest your energy to like, share, and review the podcast. And I am so grateful. All of our voices matter. There are other people saying amazing things, and I want their voices elevated and shared, right? All of our voices get to be uplifted as we seek to create the world that we want to live in. All right, so that's my ask. And here you go, another episode of Grief Heals. I can't wait to hear what you thought of today and what thinking it evoked in you and what action it's evoking from you. All right. Mwah! Welcome to another episode of Grief Heals, the podcast where we explore how it is that grief heals us with our relationship with ourselves, with one another, and our whole wide world. I am your host, Lisa Michelle Zega, and I am excited to have another conversation. Hello. So welcome to another episode of Grief Heals. I am giggling because I don't exactly know what I'm talking about today or how this is going to evolve as a podcast episode. So I'm curious, I'm trusting the process, I am leaning in, and at the end of the day, we'll see whether or not this actual episode airs. So if you would, let's just take a breath together. No special way to do this. We're just acknowledging that we're breathing the same air and recognizing that without effort, we are in fact being breathed. So just allowing yourself to notice your breathing. Nothing needs to change, and you'll notice the minute you give your attention, your breathing does in fact change in some kind of way. It's not a problem, we're just noticing together. And become aware of your body and how your body is connected to the environment. So for me, I'm standing and I'm noticing the way my weight is distributed. the way right now my weight seems to be in my heels. Nothing needs to change. I just get to notice. And I invite you to do the same. So good in our busy, busy, busy world to just begin to take notice of where we are and how we are. And what if, like, nothing needed to change, that we could just recognize how we are and where we are in any given moment? Yeah, so I'm inviting you to do any kind of movement that your body requires, is asking for, to just get an ounce more comfortable in your space. And I am moving my shoulders and kind of wiggling my hips and just allowing myself to arrive right here, right now, with you, sharing this episode of Grief Heals and trusting where it wants to take us today. So I keep getting this image of a tree ripe with fruit, right? So much fruit that it can't contain it. My in-laws used to have orange trees, and there were so many trees, so many oranges rather, on the ground because the tree at some point could not hold all that was there. And that is how I have been feeling in these last couple of weeks. I think that I mentioned at the last recording that I was heading off to San Diego, getting to train a team on working with those in poverty, training them on motivational interviewing, just like the essence of how we are with other people as they are inviting change into their lives, particularly in this scenario with people that are already experiencing a great deal of instability and maybe have a history of instability. And then also like wellness in the workplace, like how do we take care of ourselves? So that is how my week last week, you'll understand how, that's how that started. And then I went out to dinner with a new friend, and we had this big evening planned and staying the night together and like just a great time away. And I got a call that my husband was heading to the ER. And fast forward, he ended up having back surgery. And I got home as quick as I could and had some days with him, and then had other training commitments. I guess it's this week. So I was out of town for the beginning of this week, and then there was a lot of follow-up required from that and planning and just things. And so my time when this is being recorded, it is Saturday morning. I've been exposed to a lot, shared a lot, had very enriching conversations. And like I said, my tree, the tree that is me, has had so much fruit, so much abundance, so much going on that it's actually been more than I can hold, right? So yeah, I'm just arriving at the end of this kind of a week, this kind of a 2 weeks where a lot has just merged together. It's been incredibly fluid. It's been incredibly enriching. There's been a lot of emotion, as you might imagine. And and in the midst of this, there have been some things stirring in me. So last week I was at a conference. No, it's this week. This week I was at a conference, and there were two plenary speakers. One, Yusuf Salaam, and you may remember his name. He was one of a group of 5 young men who were arrested and convicted for the rape and murder of a woman in Central Park, and then 13 years later exonerated after, being locked up for that amount of time. And so, and now they're known as the Exonerated Five. So at one point they were known, these men, as the Central Park Five, and now the Exonerated Five. And he is a city councilman in New York. Anytime I am using political labels, can I just tell you, I second guess myself. I'm like, yeah, that information, those labels, it just feels like they have trouble sticking to my brain. And maybe the truth of the matter is I have really not made the effort, the intentionality to sort that out. So I'll hear myself saying something like his position, and I'm like, I don't know. But anyway, so he spoke and shared some of his story, shared what happened. He wrote a book, which I have not yet read, called Better Not Bitter. And I'm eager to read that. And then he suggested another book that's title really got me. And now I feel like it was called White Justice, Black Bodies. I'm going to have to double check. And then the next day, I didn't get to hear the plenary speaker, but I got his book and I finished it last night. So his name is Victor Rios, and his book is called Street Life. And like I said, I finished that last night. So those two people and their stories, and then the people that were in the workshop that interacted with me. So I did a workshop there. I led a workshop around working with individuals in poverty and coming together as a community for resource. This is the work of Ruby Payne out of the AHA process. I'm sure you've heard me talking about her and her work. But anyway, so I led a session on bridges out of poverty. And then there was so much richness in the room and the people talking and all the things. And with my husband being in recovery, he is, there's a lot of pain involved and a lot of limited mobility as he lets his body heal. And so he's in the bed quite a bit. And we found a series called Eric on Netflix. And so I watched that whole series with my husband. I want to say it's like 8 episodes. And all of the things that I'm sharing with you right now intersect. And in my heart, in my body, in my experience, they also very much profoundly interact with grief and how it is that grief heals. So let me just stop for a moment, feel into my own experience of sharing, and see where my heart's wanting to pick up these threads, right? What are we weaving together first? So I think I'll start with Yusuf. Wow. Yusuf Salaam. Did I already say his full name? So the first thing he did was he recounted for us in lyric that original injustice, the way that I want to say he was recounting like as if he was doing a rap, a hip hop rap. And he even said the artist's name, that he was essentially capturing to tell his story. And oh my goodness, a couple of things that stood out are his open heart, his connection to principle, foundation, I'm not ideology, like what? This connection that we are all one, that we are like my suffering is your suffering is my suffering, my oppression is your oppression. Like there's so many ways my happiness is your happiness. Like why would we want to work together for a world that's equitable, good, kind, because your provision is my provision and my provision is your provision. My success is your success. Like, we are all so intricately connected that what happens to me impacts you and vice versa. And this isn't just with human beings, this is with all beings. We are all so intricately connected. I'm looking at this. I have a vast oak grove picture larger than the one behind me that I look at, and recognizing our connection to the trees and the oxygen and the way, like the way that we feed off one another. And is it any wonder that our whole lung expression looks like trees, where we receive oxygen to nourish our bodies? So it's just, I just thinking about this interconnectedness. All right. And he shared stories of how these young men were coerced into giving a false confession. The level of deprivation that they experienced, the level of harassment, the level of threat, and that they really thought in some kind of way that by giving these confessions, they could go home, and they just longed to go home. Yusuf, in fact, did not confess. He was the only one who did not provide a confession. And at his trial, a confession of another one of the men was read at his actual trial. He talked about how their confessions did not match, and anyone paying attention would have seen how many discrepancies there were. And he talked about what happened to people because the person that actually did commit the crime that they were accused of continued a spree of harming others. And I just felt such grief and longing. And it wasn't just about what happened to him or what's happening to our brothers and sisters around the world. It was like how thick these things are in our ancestry. I think I've shared this before, but I'll share it again, because in my lineage, the oppressor and the oppressed, and is this so uncommon? I'm like, maybe this is true of all of us, right? I'll just speak for myself, though, that in my lineage, the oppressor and the oppressed are both very much present. And one of the things that brought that to my mind was reading a book called The Lynching Tree. And in The Lynching Tree, the author talked about how people would gather in celebration around Black bodies that had been beaten, strung up in trees, killed, and that this was, celebrated. Postcards were made. But what really struck me is the images I saw of little kids gathered around looking up. And I was just thinking about how while we're children, while we're young, there is a sense of being connected to who we are, and that we're all connected, and that we really are all one. And I was imagining the violence done to the soul of a young child whose caregivers are celebrating, whose community surrounding them is celebrating. And yet there is a spirit within saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is bad. And when we have a different view than our caregivers, and we are still young and little and dependent, we don't turn on our caregivers. We turn on our precious little bodies and hearts, and we believe, we internalize, I'm wrong, I'm seeing the world wrong, and we push all that down. And then often what happens is, in that cycle, the one whose precious little soul, mind, conscience, body experienced violence later perpetrates that same violence, continuing on in the line of the caregivers that they believed were right. And I guess, how is that relating to what Yusuf Salaam experienced? There is a saying that says, I think that Richard Rohr said this: pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Grief that does not experience love grieves, perpetuates like these cycles. So with the systems of oppression, all of our systems are carried forth by individuals. My brain automatically links these threads together, but I'm thinking about the police officers that essentially lied, misconstrued evidence. And I'm thinking about what grief went unwitnessed, unloved, uncared for, unacknowledged in them, such that they have become hardened to their own suffering. And the natural implication of being hardened to our own suffering is being hardened to that of others. Like, we just can't see. All we're doing is surviving, and that's just it. It's like people are seeking to survive. And that's making me think of the story that Victor Rios told, because in his story, he tells of his mom's suffering in Mexico when she is raped, when she is harmed as a young girl, kidnapped, abused, taken as a wife of an abuser, and rescued by a cousin through violence, who kills her abuser. He tells the story of her risking her life to get he and his young brother to this promised land, the United States of America. He tells how people believed that in America, everyone could eat, that there was a place to play for your children, that there were swimming pools for all. He tells of the promise that drew his mom to risk their lives to get here. And then he tells of the ways that they were oppressed, that the ways that their status as not being citizens of the United States were exploited, how they barely got by, how many jobs his mom worked, the men that she depended on all the things that she did. And the way that what they found in America was different than the dream. And he also tells this harrowing story of how he, he goes, he's just a young boy. He doesn't fit into the school system. The school system wasn't designed for him. He talks about the mistreatment of teachers. And see, I think that teachers mistreat kids. Like, I really think we mistreat others when we are not present to our own pain. If you hear tapping, it's me tapping my chest. And maybe that's, I don't know how that sounds in the microphone, but this is why I care. Why do I care about grief? I care because, and why do I love grief? Because grief will not have it. Grief is like, you must reckon with your own suffering, and it knocks and it knocks and it knocks. My own story is like my own losses. I wasn't present to the vast majority of my losses until there was a loss so near and dear to my own heart that I couldn't close it anymore. And that's where the love got in. So with Victor, he ends up joining gangs because why? He's craving love. He's craving belonging. And also, the catalyst for him joining a gang was getting beaten by bigger boys in the neighborhood. And he needs protection. We need protection. And then what kind of harassment and what kind of othering happens to him. And then a friend, Smiley was his name, and Victor witnesses his death. And he just decides, like, I've got to get back into school. I've got to create a different future. I've got to be able to provide for my mom. I've got 2 young siblings at home now who I'm a role model for. And there was one teacher, Miss Russ, and she called all of her students high achieving because she judged achievement by the different things that people had done to survive. And she gave credit for that. And she held a high standard. And she told Victor, I can't do the work for you, but I can be here while you do the work. And she tutored him and she got him supports in the community. She advocated for him. And this same guy ends up, and he's told so many stories, even of discrimination while he's holding a PhD and a professor at, it wasn't Stanford, Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara. And how on his first day on the job, another guy, 70 years old, a professor there, throws a pile of papers and tells him how many copies the guy needs, mistaking him for an assistant, how many people mocked and thought that he wouldn't make it there. And then the journey that he and his wife and all that they did to get him through school, and then later her a PhD, and the ways, like, it's beautiful. But in this process, Victor becomes present to his own suffering. And so he's continuing to give and to give and to create a better community. Yusuf became present to his own suffering and is creating the kind of world he and we want to live in. When we become present to our own pain, we can become present to the suffering of others. But when we're not, we are only going through the motions of what we've learned in our body of how to survive, even even if that method of survival is no longer helpful, is harming us and is harming others. I'm not sure if I brought up things besides Yusuf and Victor and the show Eric that I'm going to talk about now. So in the show Eric, you see all these things. You see people that are othered. You see people that are not present, have not become present to their own suffering. You see that suffering perpetuated and the violence that happens in the lives of others as people are not experiencing their own losses, so that those losses do not receive love, so that our losses can become, nutrients for creating, like nutrients in the soil to grow the new life that we want. And I highly recommend the Netflix series, because there are so many facets explored in this show. And you can see what happens with a little kid who's needing love, attention, witnessing, celebration. What happens when that's not received? What happens when the opposite is given? What's wanted is not given, but the opposite is. And how that can affect generations and what it can look like to interrupt that. The messy, beautiful process of interrupting, like our lives are not linear. There are no straight lines in nature. And do you remember the book that I talked about with Jim Forrest? And it's Writing Straight with Crooked Lines. That turns out it's from a Portuguese parable that says God writes straight with crooked lines. So there's a lot of crooked lines here. There's a lot of crooked lines. And I think what I want to leave this episode, today's conversation, where I want to leave off to have a conversation around, is how it is that grief heals. I mean, if grief is the invitation for where love was denied, where love is wanted, where love just wants to get in and soften and nourish. In my own life, I said this to someone yesterday. I am meeting so many new, incredible people. So yesterday I met Travis, who my new friend Suze told me I had to meet. And I just knew if Suze is introducing us, then this is a magical human. So, oh my gosh. And guess what? Yes, yes, and more yeses. Okay. And what I said to Travis, I heard these words come out of my mouth, and I'll just say them to you. My whole life, I just wanted to be loved. My whole life. I did not know that grief would be the door that opened me to what I'd always been craving. That's how it is I came to understand grief is love. It's why I talk about grief. It's why I care. I actually believe that what happens to me happens to you, and what happens to people that I'll never meet, that grow up in different parts of the country, in completely different experiences, contexts, that what happens to them, how society treats others, is how society treats me. And I believe we are seeing some of the fruit of this, like what's typically called the middle class, right? Like people experiencing stability. People that have known stability are slipping into instability at alarming rates. And we are now seeing some of the impacts of how people that are experiencing poverty have been treated. And now it's in our own lives. It's always been in our own lives. We just aren't always able to see the connections. And I believe now the connections are becoming more and more clear. So I better wrap up before I don't wrap up. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, ways that you connect with what I'm sharing, questions you might have. Like, it's a conversation. I made the mistake in the past of calling myself a grief expert. And I can laugh at how naive I actually am. It's like saying I'm a love expert. What does that even mean? I'm a human working to humanize humanity by just allowing myself to come in my big, bold personhood. So let's just take a breath together. On this next inhale, maybe inhaling a wee bit deeper. Pardon me. Exhaling a little longer. One more, filling our bellies like a balloon. On the exhale, letting the belly flatten all the way. And if you're open, I'm going to invite you to open wide your arms. Do you hear the assumption that we all have arms? Opening wide our big, beautiful hearts, allowing our hearts to be our arms, embracing one another, noticing that in this felt embrace, I am holding and I am held. You are holding and you are held. May you know love's embrace today, and may you share it with another. Until next time.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Ken Dalian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.